Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is July 14th, 2021. It's funny because I was thinking about this topic. This topic is particularly timely because there have been some changes in the laws in our states, in Oregon and in Utah, that I think make this necessary to update. But part of what I thought about in prepping for today was a lot of times when I'm talking to you, I'm talking about very philosophical things, and I do that because that's kind of the basis for the work, right? Is understanding the different way to think, understanding a new sensibility. But as I was preparing tonight's slides, I was thinking to myself, even though this is a very practical webinar this evening, or podcast this evening, it has in it so many important concepts that reach down and touch upon the principles that we so often talk about. So I'm going to be talking about phone calls, letters, and field visits with a little bit of an update because of the new legislation. But again, in each moment, I'll try to touch on the idea that is the foundation of the concepts that we're talking about. So let's start off with the kinds of letters you can expect to receive from your child. There's something very important, I think, for parents, and that is to consider the idea that your child considers the audience when he's speaking or when they or she are speaking. Um, they know implicitly the impact. They know our buttons. They know what works for us. I always find it very fascinating that when I'm meeting with a young person in the wilderness to begin, I watch the things that they say to me. You don't care, or you're not being fair, or you're not listening. And I hear those as examples of what has worked for them. And one of the reasons why I can be more effective with your children than you can is not because of my training or that I'm a therapist. It's because I'm not their parent and they don't have access to my hooks, right? I have enough kind of built in emotional detachment, healthy detachment, that it falls flat on me. Now, if it was my child, I would be more susceptible. When I've said this to parents in the past, this is a true story. I've used this story to illustrate how absolutely unconscious and powerful the communication is. Years ago, we had a student that had to be taken out of the field for a day because he had an ingrown toenail, and he met with the podiatrist and had the procedure. And on the way back out to the field, there was a really bad storm. So the staff made the decision to hold him overnight in a hotel and then to bring him out first thing in the morning. A very common practice on our part. If the situation arises, we would do that. I was covering for a therapist that week, and I got a lot of stress and distress from the mother because she said I should have told her. She would want to know if that kind of thing is happening, and I completely accepted her feedback. It was poor communication, and a ball dropped on my end. She knew about the ingrown toenail, but she didn't know of the change in plans last minute. And a mom might want to know that. And as I was talking to her about it, she said, I know my son wasn't manipulating me when he said this because he mentioned it in passing, kind of toward the end of the letter. And he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just talked about the fact that he had spent the night in a hotel with a couple of staff. Um, so I took that feedback and headed out to the field to do my shift out in the field. I parked my car. It was winter. Um, and before I even got to the group, after I left my car, walking to the group, the student started to walk toward me. The student that we're talking about that had written the letter. And before I could even introduce myself, he said, "What did my mother say about the letter?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "About the part about spending the night in a hotel." And I played it down and said, "She was fine. She just was curious about, how it was for you and if your toe was better." And I shared that story with the mother as an illustration of how powerful those kinds of letters can be. So consider first of all that what you're feeling when you get a letter, is what you're supposed to be feeling, right? They want you to feel hopeless, sad, desperate, powerless, scared, frustrated, angry, whatever it is. Consider that as a possibility each time. I think we do a good job of prepping parents for the angry letter that might happen. So I think you've probably heard about that from your parent coordinator. That's in the broadcast that I did on your first week in the wilderness. Um, but I don't think parents are as often prepared for the sad letters. How the genuine, I think it's genuine, the genuine grief of the child, the confusion of the child can pull at your heartstrings. It's not a matter, all of these letters, it's not a matter of are they manipulating you or not, or is it true? You know, are they manipulating you or is it genuine? It can be both. The dynamics in our relationships don't have to be contrived for them to have the kind of effect on us, the manipulative kind of effect on us. It's just the dance that we do together. The promise letter, right? That I'm better. You know, I always found it fascinating when a child would say to the parents and to me, this worked. You know, you got my attention. I'm a changed person. But anything beyond today is going to be a waste of time. I don't need it anymore. And what I always say to the client, to the student is just show us. You know, I don't want to talk about coming home or length of stay every day with our clients. That seems to me like it's such a narrow focus that it would be wasting our time just to have that conversation. However, it's a good example of a boundary. It's a good example of a boundary on their end, and it's a good example of a boundary on your end. When I talk about the letters that you write to them, I'm going to talk about that idea about what are some very practical things that you can say that demonstrate a confidence, a clarity, a strength without engaging the defense, without getting into the power struggle. You know, I say to everybody all the time. I explain that if your child can handle a yes, if they can handle the privilege that they are lobbying for, then they can handle a no. And on the most simple level, wilderness therapy is a boundary from a parent that's saying, I'm not willing to do this anymore, and I can't seem to give you the help that you need. You're not responding to it. So I want you to be there until you figure it out and we all figure it out. So it's a boundary. Apology letters, you know, I don't think this has been as much of a problem in recent years because I spent so much time talking about how guilt as well as shame are toxic on our psychology, on our self. But I will tell you in the early days, I spent a lot of time talking and teaching about this kind of a letter, the guilt letter, that I feel really bad for what I did, that I'm sorry. I think some parents are even unsettled when the child writes home a letter of awareness, which is in part a confession letter, an accountability letter. I think some parents experience that unsettling when there isn't a lot of apologies. You know, I think wilderness, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is show me. If you can handle it at home, show me by handling it there. If you feel bad about what you did, and if feeling bad about what you did is supposed to be some kind of motivation, I don't necessarily believe, I don't believe that it is, but let's say for the sake of discussion it is, then show me. This is a kind of a show me program. Sometimes I've visited programs where residential programs or other type of programs, even other wilderness programs where there's a lot of memorization of slogans, right? There's a language to it. Like the 12 steps, like I've accepted that my life has become unmanageable. I've turned my life over to a higher power. And I often say to those clients who come from those contexts, I don't see it. I don't see your recovery. I don't see the mental health that you're selling me on. And so being patient, you know, taking some time, just listening and watching, and having the luxury of not having to have a knee-jerk response is what wilderness therapy affords parents. No letter or a short letter. Early on in the program, the first half of the program, I think this has a lot to do with power and control and punishment, right? I'm going to hold you hostage by not writing you, by not giving you what you want. I think later in the program, if the child, this is important to hear, if the child has been doing their work all along and their letters as they go along get shorter and shorter, or even non-existent in some cases, I think that's really a good thing. When I come home from therapy, I don't come home anymore from therapy because I do it virtually now as a client. But when I leave my therapist's office, I don't sell my wife and my children on the improvement that I've made. In fact, what's more likely is for me to say, hey, I'm realizing through my work that I have this issue that I think is affecting you. And I'm seeing it, and I just want to be accountable for it and acknowledge it. Or, I tell the students, why don't you share your struggles? Why don't you share your setbacks with your parents? If it's not about selling them, maybe share your struggles. So I think that short letter later in the program can be evidence that they're not trying to sell you on anything. And it's not really important for them to give a long report about the daily and the weekly goings on for them. I want to explain that there are a couple of assignment letters, the impact letter to you, the response to the hopes and intentions letter. Those are assignments, but we try to have many more unstructured, uncoached letters. I'll often read a letter with a student in the field, even when I go out and visit now in my role, now even when I'm not a primary therapist, and I might give them feedback or tell them my impression, but I don't want them not to send it. In fact, I'll say to them, please send it in its imperfectness. Its imperfect state. In fact, write another one if you want to on top of it, because at a moment in time, that was a snapshot of where you were at. They think that I'm going to fix the letters, that I'm going to write these good letters, and I always explain to the clients and students, why would I do that? If you write a letter home that demonstrates that you haven't made progress, I want your parents to hear that. And if you write one home that does demonstrate progress, I want your parents to hear that. So not only do I not want to break the law and stop letters from going home or editing them, it doesn't serve me clinically to overmanage your letters or correct them or edit them. And the same with you. I'll talk about that a little bit later as you write your letters, kind of how to write or send the imperfect letter. You might get several assignment letters of the same assignment. For example, we have an assignment called the War Story assignment, where they write down a couple of instances where they did something that got them in trouble, that is an unhealthy coping, but they talk about it like they're bragging. And you might get 2 or 3 versions of that. It's not that we're trying to overanalyze this. We just want you to see the progress, the difference, and even to talk about the differences in the iterations of the letter. Letters are a process, not an outcome. They're a snapshot in time. I love the fact that there's time in between, sending letters and getting them back, because that slows things down to a pace that invites mindfulness. I say, back in the very old days, before even most people had fax machines, or maybe they had a fax machine at work or a fax machine at the local mailboxes, etc., or Kinko's. I love the snail mail because it even asked for a deeper self-reflection. Sometimes you would have to write a letter before you even got that week's letter. And what that I think invites is speaking from your center, not speaking in this kind of push and pull, knee-jerk reactive way. Sometimes when clients say, I don't want to write it in a letter, I want to say it face to face, I'm always a little bit skeptical of that, because I think that often suggests that they want to be able to control it. It's really hard to write a letter and just send it out, because I can't read your face. If you get upset at my letter of awareness, I can't mitigate your frustration or upsetness. I think it's an exercise in speaking your truth and letting go. And then the fact that everybody has to wait on both sides a day or 2 or 3 to get a response, you have to kind of settle into yourself. I think with all things, it doesn't just relate to letter writing, but it's important to run it through the parent filter. You know, I want children to tell you what they think and feel. I want them to make requests if they're inclined to make them about length of stay or aftercare. You know, these are the attributes or the qualities or the characteristics of a program that I want. I don't care what age they are. How much weight we put into those requests is affected by how much progress, the reasoning behind it. Right? If the child is saying, I just want a co-ed facility because I want to be around people of the opposite sex, opposite gender, I say, why is that? What are you looking for? Are you distracted, like most Americans, with building a relationship before you've really settled some of the important questions about who you are? A very American and human thing to do. So the parent filter is informed by your own experience, your own wisdom, the therapist, right? All of the things that the therapist is telling you and teaching you week to week. They're informed by my podcasts, my broadcasts. And then you take all of that into consideration and then you digest it, you interpret it. I think, I used to have this experience where parents would write, they would get their letters, say, on Wednesday night, posted to the portal, the parent portal. And when I woke up in the morning on Thursday morning, I would have in my inbox a 10-page single-space typed letter from a parent back to a child. Almost never did we, as a group, agree that letter should be sent, that it would be helpful. That definitely speaks to a reactiveness, right? A back and forth that is more about fight or flight or trauma responses than it is about really communicating and connecting. I think it can be a tool, kind of like journaling. I mean, people believe in and talk about journaling all the time as a tool for self-reflection and awareness. And I think that letter can serve that. And so writing the unsent letter, I also think it's okay. This is one of my favorite aspects as I get into your responses. One of my favorite aspects is having parents say, here was my initial reaction to what you said or to the report of your week. But here's what I'm learning. And here's how I want to react to it now. I think that accomplishes honesty, but also it shows the evolution and the growth in your work. More than anything else, notice your response. When I do my parent phone calls, when I'm in that role, I always start off with, did you get the letters? Did you have a chance to read them? Tell me what came up for you. I might not need to coach or interpret, but I want to hear your response. And then as I kind of learn what your response is, I'm learning about the family dance. I'm learning about the family's dynamics, the roles, the rules, the messages. And that becomes a part of the information that guides my treatment planning for them and also for you. So, similarly to you, most of the letters that you write will be guided but not dictated. I like to talk about what not to do first because I think that's a much more clear and practical list. And the first thing that I want to say to you is don't write a good letter. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about not evolving and not building skills and communicating maybe more assertively or listening better than you have in the past. All of that is fine. I'm talking about the fact that in many cases, you can't write a perfect letter. And especially, I'm a writer on my side job, right? And the first thing I learned that helped me break through writing a book was just write crap. Edit it later. Or in your case, write the letter and then we can talk about it if it needs some shifts or a change. We have a philosophy at Evoke. We will coach you, especially with those assignments. We will coach you and your letters. But if it doesn't change and you don't want it to change, we'll let it go. Because then your child gets to deal with you unfiltered, uncoached, maybe in the old way. And then we again get to deal with that letter. So we want to guide and teach a little and teach you some skills, but we don't want to overcoach or over control the process. Try to avoid lecturing. We got that. We got it. Wilderness therapy is a loud message, a clear message. So lecturing and preaching aren't important. And be careful about trying to, this will sound strange, but be careful about trying to comfort. Really, really what I'm saying is rescue them. And while that in one context, comfort is part of healthy attachment. So why would I say that? What I mean is most of us in the role of parents are uncomfortable with our children's distress and pain. So our inclinations to quote unquote comfort really end up being trying to talk them out of their feelings, to try to control what they feel, to make them feel better. And we would be wise to listen and hold space for that and pause. Pause. I'll say this because it's true that it's my observation and experience that most parents, most human beings on planet Earth, and I'm not talking about Evoke therapy programs, I'm talking about parents and people on planet Earth, will try to control what other people feel, especially when those feelings are distressing feelings directed at the receiver. So practice containing and listening, and let therapy happen to change the child more organically, deeper, at a much deeper level. Again, be wary of teaching. It's a lot like preaching, and it will provoke the defense in the child. Trying to convince them of anything. Like I said, we'll do the heavy lifting therapeutically. It's the same reason why softball or baseball coaches don't want parents on the sideline yelling at their child. Like, we got it. That's not helpful for the child. You're in this weird position as a parent that to navigate the core task of adolescence and young adulthood, which is differentiation and development of self, to navigate that, children need to kind of rebel, push you away, not be taught by you. One father said to me, when considering his child coming to our program, he said, I just want to get back to that place where my son will listen to me and to my wisdom. And I said to him, I understand that, but that's not really the gold. That's not where the gold is. The gold is in listening and holding boundaries. And the teaching will become less and less and less. And when children differentiate by rejecting your wisdom, I mean, think about that. You are actually contributing. It's the same way that when I've talked about the political divide in this country, when I've written about it, and I have written about it a little bit, what I say to people is, you're angry at the other side, both sides, I say this to, and your anger and vilification and shame and judgment is actually part of the problem. So I know it feels good to lecture, to teach, to preach, but it's actually having the exact opposite effect that you want it to. Don't apologize for consequences, alliances, getting help and guidance, new skills, bringing up the past and not trusting. I think, again, we get held hostage by these things. It's silly to trust an untrustworthy person. It doesn't mean you shame them or you even say it out loud, but you don't have to trust them. And trust is something that you have to own anyway. It's not objective. There are people that trust children that are untrustworthy, and there are people that don't trust children that are trustworthy. Trust is like a feeling. It's yours to own. And it's really not up for debate. You get to work that out yourself. Apologize. I've seen some wonderful, profound, healthy, and courageous letters from parents to children apologizing for their contribution to the problem. Even I've had parents write letters apologizing for letters they wrote while their child was in wilderness because they wrote such a shaming, attacking letter to the child. But in those enlightened letters, they don't apologize for consequences. They apologize for the shame, the control, the listening, the blaming, the psychological abuse, if you will, not the boundaries. It's a weird position that children often put parents in because they want you to get better because they think you're the problem anyway, which we'll talk about that another time. But then they criticize you for starting to sound like a therapist or taking coaching from people that are supporting you. A sponsor, a mentor, a therapist, a parent coach, a wilderness therapist. And you don't have to apologize for that. It's going to sound different when you grow. Avoiding difficult topics. It's okay to bring up. See, when I was young, I just wanted to create this pristine intervention that parents would be happy about. But the problem is when children go on to the next setting, if that's home or another school, and they regress, yeah, the parent looks back at us and says, you guys were wonderful, but now, my child is lost again. I want them to get lost while they're with us. I want difficult topics and subjects to occur through letter exchanges and in-person visits and phone calls. You don't have to tackle and fix everything, but I don't want you to avoid the difficult topics. And I would suggest that you consider strongly not avoiding immediately, and not responding immediately. That you let it sit. I went through some personal growth in the early 2010s where I learned to react slower to emails from partners and from people that worked for me. To wait a day or two if I felt triggered. If I felt upregulated, that means angry, agitated, frustrated, scared, hurt. And wilderness therapy letter writing naturally affords you that. So waiting to respond a day or two get you back to focusing on the things in your communication that are important and that aren't a fight or a flight response. Taking a step back. That's what the phone calls can offer you. That's what the time can offer you. I wrote this today because, I spend 80% of my time on these broadcasts, teaching parents to be a safe container, to listen, to build a secure and a safe attachment with the child. And what's implied that I think say enough is self is first. You don't have to take it. You don't have to lay down. You don't have to compromise your boundaries and your limits. I was talking to a parent recently, and I was explaining the child was trying to negotiate, and they thought the child was being manipulative and guilting and so forth. And I modeled it for them. And I said, it feels like, shut up. I don't want to hear it anymore. And the parent said to me, well, that doesn't sound like you at all or what you've been teaching us. And I said, and she asked, do I say that to him? And I said, it's not the words. And she said, but that's the energy. And it's like, yeah, the energy is I matter. What I can tolerate matters. See, the shift in boundaries is here's what I need to feel okay. Here's what I'm willing to do, to participate in, to allow. And here's what I'm not. It's not I'm right. I'm going to preach. You're wrong. You should be ashamed. I'm going to intimidate. I'm going to threaten. I'm going to shame. I'm going to scare. It's a humble human. Here's my boundary. So self first. And if you're upregulated or triggered, Talk to your Evoke therapist about that and sort that out before you respond. Trends in letters. Early on, you get the hopes and intentions letter. And sometimes you might need a follow-up to that. If they don't seem to respond to it and you're seeing the same kinds of things, you can follow it up in part of your letters going forward. Like, I'm still seeing it. I'm still hearing you try to pitch and make a case for something, and I'm telling you, this is my boundary. I'm going to say one of the most important things I think I've ever learned in all of this, and I've ever taught, and that is the strength of a boundary is in its human vulnerability, not in its rightness. It is more powerful and impactful and effective to say, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but here's my boundary. That's more powerful than saying, let me tell you why I'm right, and let me tell you why you should believe and agree with me, why you should line up behind me and go with me. And let me tell you, Brad told me, and the therapist told me, and I read a book that told me to do this, and I listened to a podcast, and here's an article from the University of Wisconsin that shows that what I'm doing is right. That's a more fragile, weak, tenuous place to operate from. But it's really hard to push against somebody's boundary when it is, here's what I need. I don't know if I'm right. Believe me, I have my own self-doubt that I battle every day. But this is my boundary right now. This is my best guess. And this is what I need to feel okay. In the middle, as they sell and talk about their progress, the highs in wilderness aren't that high, and the lows aren't that low. What we're hoping with this intervention is the distance will kind of flatten the peaks and raise the valleys in your mind and your trauma response and your fight or flight response. So slow to believe. We'll see. Show me. And you don't have to say those things. I'm speaking of a kind of energy that you have. And be guarded in your optimism. The best thing about wilderness therapy is it is in vivo, right? It's right there in front of you. It's not a term paper. It's not a TED Talk. It's not a workbook. It's life with the volume turned up and the spotlight on it. It's life. And so it's more important what they're doing than what they're saying. And so slow down, take a step back, be slow to react, and be slow to come around. You don't have to make big conclusions and adjustments. When people ask me, do you think my child is being sincere? That's not even the right question. The child believes it. The child believes what they're saying half the time. But it doesn't have legs. It's not integrated into them. I always say that you can talk to me about the value of cardiovascular fitness and training on a track. But if you're not running around in circles on the track, it doesn't matter. So let's just see if you're running around the track. Then I know what you believe. At the end, be mindful of future information. We're very intentional about future information, including hints or allusions to time. With most clients, we want to kind of remove the finish line, which can be very, very difficult for them, even create temporarily a hopelessness in them. But the work is forever. I said this the other day. My hope for all of you is not that we fix you or your kids. I hope we do a good enough job that you want to go to therapy for the rest of your life. That you want to work on yourself for the rest of your life. I do that in therapy. Or go to Al-Anon. Or go to Codependence Anonymous. or read self-help books or practice self-care or meditate, right? That's the goal. You're not done until you die anyway. So let's stop pretending that we're going to wrap this thing up in a bow in 2 months or 3 months. If we do a good enough job, you'll get a taste of something sweet and you'll say, I want that. I want that. I've shared and I share all the time. I've been with my current therapist for 22 years because it's the best hour of my week. Because it's the one place that I can't do it wrong. It's the 1 hour that I don't have to be the biggest person in the room. I can vent. I can complain. I can grieve. I can ask questions. I can talk the entire time. I can shut up if I want to. And I happen to have this capable therapist who knows how to hold space for me and knows what psychotherapy is. One of the temptations, it's almost instinctive for everybody, is don't sell aftercare plans. If you find yourself writing good things about the program, the school, or the setting that you've decided on for the next step, you're selling it. One simple way to kind of guard against that is mention all the things you think they won't like. I don't think you'll like the lack of freedoms. I don't think you'll like the dress code. I don't think you'll like it that it's single gender, that you can't listen to your music, whatever it is. Don't sell it. See, you see how that's a distorted kind of an idea on a boundary. I'm going to make you want it so I don't have to deal with the fragile, insecure, frightening aspect of setting a boundary. It's okay to talk about the past and the deeper topics. It's great to bring it up. You don't have to finish it, but it's okay to start it. Parents ask about self-disclosure. I think sharing about your struggle and your journey is great. By the way, I don't know if I wrote this anywhere. I can't remember. But don't give a lecture about peer pressure. Tell them how you still struggle with peer pressure, if you can relate. I don't know anybody who's never worried about what others think of them. So instead of you're telling your child, which is the temptation, you shouldn't worry about what other people think about you, and self-esteem is an inside job, and on and on and on. Just say, I still struggle with what other people think about me as a parent. I don't go outside without makeup. I care about the car that I drive and how people. I mean, you share. If you share a struggle about peer pressure that you're still struggling with, and you don't have it figured out, wonderful, wonderful. And you know what you're likely to get back is a lecture from your child about peer pressure. Some wisdom from your child about how they've solved the issue of peer pressure. You can be chatty or newsy, that's fine. Not everything has to be intense. Sometimes the letters are saying no. Again, it's not about lecturing or teaching or convincing or debating or building a case. In Al-Anon, the phrase goes, sometimes no is a complete sentence. See, as we heal, we get to a place where we realize it's okay to say no. I read a post the other day in social media. I'll clean it up a little bit for the podcast, but somebody wrote, if you're not a jerk, they used another word. If you're not a jerk in somebody else's story, you're probably not doing good boundary work. People in your life, even those that love you and are close to you, even your partner, even if you're on the same page generally, people aren't always going to celebrate your improved boundaries. Just not the way that it works. It'll happen on occasion, and the more evolved everybody is around you, the more so. but you can expect to have pushback, change back to the way things were kind of energy. Responding to letters, updates, and your life. That's what I say to parents. You're responding to the letters that they wrote you. You're responding to the updates that I'm giving you. And then what else is going on in your life? Some of it is news. Some of it is personal growth and evolution. Those are all fair game to respond to. I like to think sometimes if you have a good cop, bad cop kind of dynamic, switch the roles around, have the good cop, right one that's just about connecting. Again, the genius of letter writing therapy, which is part of what wilderness does for people, is it slows things down and gets them to do things in a way that is intentional instead of, they talk about when you heal trauma, you develop response flexibility, the ability to respond creatively and flexibly. A vacation letter, like you're taking time off, either literally or figuratively, it's okay for you to take some time off from therapy. Self-improvement isn't equal to self-care. Sometimes self-care is staring at the wall, watching a stupid TV show, laying on the beach, right? Eating popcorn, watching a movie. And I think I saw some people posted the last couple of days on social media that said, be addicted or get addicted to self-improvement. And I thought, that's a really dangerous thought. I would say get addicted, but it doesn't make sense. But make the project like becoming yourself. And sometimes self-improvement means accepting and being gentle with yourself, being kind and forgiving and showing yourself grace and acceptance. And it's true. This is the weirdest thing in the world. It's through the self-acceptance that we get better, right? The no letter. Sometimes if you're in a power struggle or things are getting repetitive, just saying, I'm choosing not to. I usually like parents to write a one-sentence letter, so the child knows that it's intentional. Like, I don't have anything new to say this week. I feel like we're going nowhere, so I'm not going to write this week. That's the letter. The past and the present feelings you have, like I said, I absolutely love as a skill to say, here's how I would have reacted, but here's how I'm going to react this time. So the child sees the honesty, but the work. Again, responding to their letters, the therapist report, the weekly journal, anything that's coming up on the weekly parent portal, your life, anything that's going on in your own therapy, any progress that you're making. I want to say to you that when we coach you on letters, you're not in trouble. If you have that impulse or instinct that if you get coached that you've done something wrong, sometimes I say to a parent, just write the letter and don't try to get it right. And if there's something I need to coach, I'll coach it. I do letter writing outside of wilderness therapy with clients. Because again, it's slow, it's in black and white. People in therapy, when people are talking, I'll mention something and someone will say, well, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said. But when it's on paper, you can really dissect it and say, let's not say that, but let's say this way. And sometimes I'll say, do you see the difference? I think it's still aimed toward the ultimate goal that we both agree is a worthy goal. But you see how this is different. Take some risks. If you can't write crap, you're not going to finish a book. All writers will tell you, for the most part, will tell you, the key to writing is being willing to write crap. And then going back and editing what's necessary. The same is true with this. Really, 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 really important to tell you. Their response is not necessarily an indication of how well you did. When I had a mother say to me one time, I guess I wrote a bad letter this week, and I said, "What makes you think that?" And she said, "Well, look at my son's response." And I said, "That's about him. It's okay. He's upset, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it." But again, when we don't have a sense of self, we look to others and most dangerously, I guess I would say, to our children to tell us whether what we're doing is right or wrong or not. I always want to hear how people are reacting. But again, I run it through my parent filter, my adult brain, my brain in recovery, my brain in therapy, and I make sense out of it there. Sometimes therapists will have you write a reflection letter to their I feel statement. I don't like it if it sounds too robotic. I don't like it when they write you robotic reflection letters, frankly. I mean, I understand the discipline and the skill of it. I think it's a decent exercise, but it doesn't hit me here. When my son, my 19-year-old, a few years ago wrote me a reflection letter of my hopes and intentions letter, I thought to myself, I had no doubt he could hear me. But I'd rather have him reflect more organically. Like, this is what I hear you say, instead of regurgitating it back. Responding to a hopes and intentions letter is one of their assignments. A letter of awareness, or LOA. It used to be called a letter of accountability, but I felt like they had too much of a kind of a police, probation officer kind of sensibility to it. So it's more about like, here's what's going on for me. Here's what I've been doing. It has confession in it, but it's more than confession. It's not intended to be a letter where they justify what they did, but they do explain it. I lashed out because I was scared. I was self-medicating because I was hurt or sad. I think the most important letter, if there were only one letter at every kind of program, for every kind of person, if there were only one, there's not, but just to emphasize its importance, that letter, in my opinion, would be the impact letter that the identified patient writes to their spouse or to their parents or to their family. The impact letter is a doorway into the pain and the trauma. It can sound blaming at first and raw. It can sound accusatory. It can sound unaccountable. I'm okay with that as a starting point. I just want to get it out. And I also want to help you figure out how to hear it. I have sat in your seat many times, having one of my children tell me what I did wrong to affect them and how that led to the symptoms that they're getting treated for now. And there have been times that I don't agree with their version of events. So I know how hard that is. But I also know, as a therapist, having sat on that side of it, how to say to you, you just hear their version of things. They're telling you the best way that they can the dilemma. And if they're exaggerating or making things up, it's probably because they don't feel heard. That's what we do when we don't feel heard, is we exaggerate and make things up. If they're blaming, that tells you that they don't want to look at themselves. That's a therapeutic issue that requires a therapeutic response, not a boot camp response, not a drill sergeant response, not a punch in the nose metaphorically, but it deserves investigation and curiosity. And if it's hard to hear an impact letter, there's probably some work for you to do. One of my favorite broadcasts is, I think it's number 309, Malia, shifting the idea of what it means to be a good parent. Listen to that. If receiving the impact letter or hearing your child that's in treatment, the identified patient, talk to you about how they were hurt by you, listen to that broadcast. Try not to defend. My wife Michelle wrote a letter to my son. It was part of the hopes and intentions letter, but I thought it was one of the most eloquent, beautiful letters I'd ever seen written from a parent to a child. In one paragraph, she wrote to our son, who was going through a pursuits trip, individualized therapeutic program for him. She said, "It's not lost on me." This is what she wrote. "It's not lost on me, the irony that we sent you to this program to deal with behaviors and symptoms that you developed to protect you in part from us and how we hurt you." Do you see how profound and generous that is? My wife didn't apologize for the behavior. She didn't make excuse me. She didn't apologize for the boundary and for the intervention. She didn't backtrack. She showed no weakness or no lack of resolve. But man, she gave my son this great gift of saying, "I know that your symptoms are somewhat related to what I've done to you. And I love you enough that I want you to unravel those, as messy as that can be and as inefficient and crooked as that process can be. I want you to do that, and I want to be there for it." Sometimes when you get the war story assignment or the purposes of destructive behaviors assignment, that's an assignment that's similar to the war story, where they said, "Here's what I did that was quote unquote wrong or bad or unhealthy, and this is why I did it. This is how it served me. This is how my depression, my substance use, my lying, my sexual promiscuity, acting out, my self-harm, my school refusal, this is how it helped me." We're trying to get them into a psychological matrix to understand that symptoms have root causes, and the root causes are trauma and woundedness, big and small. Beyond just the basic, you're learning to hear self and safety. Be reluctant. This is the one counterintuitive piece of my teaching that most people won't teach you. Be reluctant to share your feelings with the child, your feelings of disappointment or even pride in what they're doing. Because I can just tell you this, if you want a resource, The Drama of the Gifted Child is the most important book written about children I've ever heard of. And Parenting from the Inside Out, and then my two books I kind of am fond of. But a child wears parents' feelings in a heavy way. And we don't want them to get better because it makes you happy. We don't want them to get better so you can sleep at night. We don't want them to get better so that you're not scared or frustrated or angry or disappointed. Because if that is the primary motivation, it's okay if it's a start, right? Then we'll change it as we go. But if that is the primary motivation for their change, we are actually applying a cure that is the problem. We want them to get better because it's better for them. And if they think it's their job to make you happy and it's their job to give you a good sleep at night, I'm not saying that how they affect people is irrelevant. But if the primary goal is to make you feel better about them, they'll walk out into the world with no sense of self, subject and vulnerable to peer pressure like you wouldn't believe, not knowing who they are, looking for peers and boyfriends and girlfriends and partners and toxic narcissistic friends to define them. Yes, mom's worry and dad's frustration are important to consider, but they're not the fuel for long-term change. In fact, trying to make them proud or failing at making them proud is probably the problem, or it relates to it quite a bit. Developing the courage to be vulnerable. I want siblings and extended family members to write more and more often. And the therapist can guide that. It's not because those letters are going to be perfect. And we don't want that oftentimes in the early part of the process. But let's see what it looks like when within our structure, within our cocoon, within our small box. Let's see what happens when and if they communicate with other people. Phone calls. There's something new. That's why we're doing this tonight. There are new laws in Oregon and Utah and sweeping the country in all the states that says that a child can call you anytime they want. Well, not anytime they want. If they request a call, then they can have it. And we want to support the law. That means you are likely to get a call before you feel clinically ready sometimes. You might get one that is just going to sound like the exact reason that you sent them there. So I wanted you to know that and be prepared for that possibility. That could happen because it's the law. And it's kind of early in the process, but what you'll be asked to do is to hold a boundary in the way that I've discussed it this evening. You can also refuse the call. You don't have to take it. That's not the law. You can say to your therapist you're not ready, the Evoke therapist, that you're not ready. You can keep it short. You can set parameters around it. The therapist can be on it, and you can have a conversation where they can support you on it. You can ask for that. So you don't have to take the call. But we have to provide it. And eventually, if it happens once or a couple of times, we're going to ask you, do you want to keep getting these phone calls? And you can say no. And that means you just don't have to answer the phone call. Or we can just tell the child your parents aren't interested in talking to you until the conversation can be productive, until it doesn't include you yelling or screaming or swearing or threatening or blackmailing or name calling. But I wanted you to know that change has occurred, and that's brand new in 2020, 21, and it's going to be universal because I understand it. The states and the government are trying to protect kids from abuse. And this is one of the safety measures. And so that means that you're going to have a little bit less insulation than parents in years past have had. That means that and it's not a bad thing if you see it as a part of the process, as part of the learning and the growing process, because it means that while that insulation, that mitigating distance is closed and you have to deal with it, I think it's a crash course in kind of learning about boundaries and healthy communication. Other than that, the therapist's use of the phone call differs from case to case, from time to time, from week to week. When wilderness, first of all, when wilderness therapy, before we started our wilderness program, this is kind of something I'm proud of. Before we started our wilderness program, no program in the country allowed children to call their parents at all. Didn't exist. And there were no mid-program visits at all. And we came on the scene in 1998 and we said, that's not good enough. So we introduced parent visits as a regular part of the program and parent phone calls as a part of the program, because we want you to deal with the problem in real time. It's again, it's not as pristine of an intervention because you have to deal with the messiness, but the beautiful part about dealing with the messiness is that you learn. There's going to be some manipulation. There's going to be, when they get on the phone call, just hearing your voice, being on the phone, will likely trigger their homesickness and sadness. Yes, we give them directions because their mind goes blank, but we don't want to manage it. We want some structure and some boundaries, but we want things to be loose enough that we get to see the family issues, the family dynamics. And so ask the therapist what's the agenda. And sometimes it's just family therapy. Sometimes it's a reward. Sometimes it's to dig a little deeper because the child is closed. And so we want to expose them to perhaps the greatest trigger in their life, which is you. So sometimes it becomes something to kind of unearth the dynamics a little bit more. Being passive, regressing, everything is grist for the mill. I like it that they can show you some progress. It's a little bit contrived because they're still in our care, but you can start to see the skills develop. And it's a practice. We often ask them to write an outline of things they want to talk about because, again, it's not uncommon for a child and their parents to get on the phone and just to be repeating the words over and over again. It's good to hear your voice. And while that's a wonderful sentiment, we kind of want to move past that. You don't have to plan it or rehearse it. Sometimes it'll the therapy phone calls are decided in the field. And so we'll get on the phone with you and say, your child's going to be joining us in 15 minutes. Be careful of future information. Again, be mindful to hint or talk. I loved it when one student said, when he was asking his father if he knew about the next setting, and the father was hemming and hawing and kind of suggesting that he didn't know. And the son said, "It's okay, Dad. I understand that you would want to lie to me, but I can deal with the boundary now. So you can just tell me if you don't want to talk about it." And I was like, blew the dad away. You don't have to lead them. Let there be silence. Let them be responsible for 50% of the call. Don't fill the empty spaces and ask questions to push the conversation along. Just listen and wait. And let them have their feelings, because their homesickness and sadness and frustration and anger will be triggered by being on the phone with you. Just listen. If you can, thank them for telling you. Tell them you hear them or reflect it back. Be honest in your reaction. It can be helpful to read and practice the I feel and reflective listening skills to get some idea of the principles in play. The 8 tools for transforming relationships in one of the chapters of my book, and there's also a podcast about it, can be helpful. It's okay to tackle and introduce tough topics, remembering, knowing you don't have to resolve them. And be patient with the fact that we're using satellite phones and there's going to be static and disconnection. We can't change that. That's the cost of doing therapy in the wilderness. With field visits, it's the same as parent phone calls. It's a part of the process. Sometimes it's a reward. Sometimes it's pushing the child and the family deeper into their work. Sometimes it's observing the family dynamics. I like it because what it means in our program is that your child is going to get to see several parent visits that aren't his or hers or theirs, but they're going to get several parent visits. So they get to, it's not an isolated experience. They're having contact and they get to see and learn vicariously through other parent visits. Sometimes it can substitute for a transition visit. Sometimes you do both. Sometimes young adults, we want to transition them without you visiting at the end. So visiting a week or 2 beforehand. Sometimes we'll set up, if you need to do a visit, we might set up something 3 weeks from now because you need to plan work and travel, maybe childcare or pet care. And I don't know what that visit's going to be at that time because I'm not there yet. It could be a reward to celebrate progress. It could be a boundary visit. It could be something just to work on and dig into the family dynamics. So we can set a date without knowing what it's going to be like. Some of my most valuable parent visits of all time were the ones that didn't go well. Sometimes the visit can be cut short. And I've had parents leave prior to their initial plans. And that's been a tough and painful process. That's the exception to the rule, I will tell you. But it's an outlier. But it's possible. And it speaks to kind of the organic nature of the visit. Ask your therapist why or why not. I remember that I had a somebody tell me years ago when we started doing parent visits, and somebody said, you're making it really anticlimactic. And I at first felt defensive. I wanted to kind of support my program's philosophy. But then I realized it is anticlimactic to have them visit in the middle and then visit 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later at the end. But that's a good thing because it's more than just a reunion and the excitement of reuniting. It's time to work. When you come for a visit, come prepared to work. Try your best to let go of expectations and agendas. Like I said, bring up the tough stuff. You have to take some chances, but you have the support to do it. Please follow the rules that we ask of you just to keep our program consistent and to maintain integrity. Be present and engage in the wilderness experience. Cry if you feel like it. Bring your own sunglasses, water bottle, weather relevant gear. We'll provide anything that you don't have that you need. You could walk up in a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops, and we could outfit you. But bring outdoor, comfortable clothes that you're willing to get dirty in. Be conservative with jewelry, makeup. Leave your cell phone elsewhere. Don't bring it with you. Leave it in the car at best and maybe back at base. Don't come simply to celebrate. Celebration will happen. But it's more than that. If the agenda is to celebrate, you'll avoid hard topics. You won't want to discuss or step into some difficult conversations. Be careful to in an attempt to try to make it a quote unquote nice visit. Don't bring gifts. Don't bring extra food. Don't give future information. You don't have to solve everything. Let them have their feelings and accept coaching. All of this is to say that we're trying to create a program that gives you opportunities with some safe support to practice connection, to develop connection and to practice new skills. Learn from the group, learn from the letter coaching, learn from the phone calls. Learn the value of not focusing on future information and taking it one day at a time, being present. So many parents after visiting will say, everybody should do this. I wish I was out here. You're not in control of the weather. It's too hot in the summer. It's too cold in the winter. It's too wet in the spring. And it's too windy and cold and rainy in the fall. And that's life. And I even had to deal with that one with my own visit. Watch the child's reactions and learn. I remember I had a father get very angry with me because his child reacted poorly to the boundary. And the father got mad at me because I coached him on the boundary. And I said, it's okay. Your son's poor reaction tells you a little bit about where he's at. Some people suggest that you should trust the process. You can also be skeptical too. You can show up with skepticism. The difference, in my opinion, between a good therapist and a great therapist is a good therapist wants you to trust the process, and a great therapist meets you where you're at. Let your therapist guide the visit and be open to new directions. It can be a powerful investment in changing dynamics. I don't have time to answer questions. We can take those up in my next webinar, so I'll just go through some announcements. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you're a wilderness current parent or alumni parent, the next support group online is July 15th. That's tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. If you're an alumni of our intensives program, August 10th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, contact Malia at evoketherapy.com for more information and for registration details. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, I cannot promote this enough. Attending one of our intensives can be the best contribution you make to your child's long-term growth. The next one available is August 11th through 15th. We have them in person or online. If resources or financial or time are limited, you can also do one online. The next one online is September 23rd through 25th. And then if you've been to a Finding You, we have a Returning to You. I'll be running that in October 6th through 10th. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. If you want a parent coach or a life coach, a therapy coach outside of your weekly calls or after the program or independent, because most of these broadcasts are listened to by people that don't have kids in our program, you can contact Travis at evoketherapy.com to have an Evoke trained, attachment-based, capable therapist work with you. Our pursuits trips are available, custom trips 3 to 30 days in between programs, after programs, reconnecting to the work. We ask all parents of our wilderness program to attend at some point 6 12-step support groups starting now. If you haven't started, start now. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, AdultChildren.org is also a great one. RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired alternative to the 12 steps. And NAMI.org is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Great free classes and resources in your local area. All of these broadcasts are available on the podcast app. Just search any podcast app platform, search Finding You an Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy. Also, you can find us on Instagram using @Evoke Therapy Intensives. And also my handle is @Dr. Brad Reedy on all the major, on Twitter and Instagram. Find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then our blog has wonderful contributions from our staff and our therapists each week, beautifully curated by Malia, who is also our moderator for this evening and for most of our broadcasts. Thank you for joining us. I'm going on vacation next week, so I'll have some dates and some topics to come. Thank you on behalf of the people that love you for being willing to attend, to do your work, and being open to this process. It's a great contribution to those that you love and to yourself, of course. Have a great evening. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.